Alright. Satisfactory is a game, and it's good, and I'm just having trouble getting back into the gears of making a video. I don't remember how I would think of a start segment, and I've lost touch with the writing coming naturally to me. It often takes repeated attempts to get to the level I'm satisfied with, and it's never easy, especially when I haven't really been at it for a while. So I'll start with a me-centered segment that you can skip before we get into the actual talking about the game. I haven't really picked up making a video in months, and I feel lazy about that, since whatever else I creatively picked up has no end goal or sound reason to invest energy into. Really simply put, I've been on a nostalgia trip that's both fun and painful to be in, because I've taken up trying to code a multiplayer thing in GTA and it occupied all of my free time, which means no YouTube plans. I haven't done anything other than that, and I know Generation Zero has another big announcement because the release of their Resistance trailer. Check it out, it's actually well made. I've just gotten a few more comments wondering what's my next take on GZ when I've been doing other games entirely this whole time. YouTube only signal boosts what got attention before, so uploading anything other than GZ is going back to square one. It's a small gripe that slowly drained me, but over time I can go on pointless other endeavors to build up that creative reserve again, waiting for the right time and sufficient energy to waste, or get blown away by a game that just hits me with a multiplier on my energy gain, kicking me into creative overdrive. So this is where Satisfactory comes into picture. From unproductive to addicted, this factory builder had surprised me for how engaging it is in its two ways: the conventional factory assembly and the engagement between the player and the planet they've landed on. What absolutely has reignited the old creative engine is a familiar formula of the fuel that's used in the Fix-It Vessel's engine that is set to launch a bunch of engineers on a planet and deprive it of resources, all the while destroying the ecosystem, wildlife, and other things that the player will never care to think about. But it's fine, the game doesn't have actual environmental impact simulation or punishing reactive world for the amount of harm you do. It's just tons of fun with quite an easygoing acquisition of resources, with the difficulty only increasing over time like any normal game that's built to be fun instead of cumbersome. Why I fell in love with this game and why it is this familiar formula I keep referencing, to me, is the similarity between Satisfactory and Tekkit. I wouldn't know how regurgitated this point might be because I'm writing and recording this all in a spur of the moment without much research. I just jumped into the game, jumped onto making a video about the game, and jumping on my conveyor belts like it's a parkour level. This feels like Tekkit to me in concept, but the survival aspect is flipped. Tekkit's a mod pack on top of a survival game, but Satisfactory is that mod pack in the entire focus with survival elements, exploration incentives, and pretty graphics to really drive it home as its own game. I can make this the similarity to Tekkit or any other factory builder, but don't take that at face value because it might be an insult for what either Tekkit is in Minecraft or what Satisfactory is expanding to be. Satisfactory just takes the assembly aspect as its core element, and the other mechanics, incentives, rewards, and possibilities orbit that core element, giving it more layers of depth to what could have been very simple. So, Satisfactory makes a factory building experience satisfying and easily exposes your messy nature of managing these things. And I can build and rebuild, planning whole assembly lines ahead, but I will never really get rid of the spaghetti, and those who can build without spaghetti should be worshipped as engineering gods. Or people actually just lay out their plan, calculate spending, account for every possibility, and factor in expanding eventually, which I'm told is actually normal for adults. But why? As lightly as story is taken in this game, in an early game, there's still lore and a theme that give every piece of construction means to even be there. The player has actual reason for existing and playing the role in a factory builder game. You're some engineer employed and supplied by existing company, Fix-It Incorporated, that in pod sends out these engineers to their survival on a scouted but unpopulated planet to establish a link, and for the player gives a lot of creative freedom to begin the steps of inhabiting the planet by making use of its resources. resources. This makes the objective for you to survive, set up, explore, and evolve to automate your processes and make your life easier on that planet. Whilst Fixit gives you these granular incentives and advancements in return for resources, it sort of makes sense as a well set up engineer is able to give returns to the corporation. You, the player, are not forced to return unless you want new perks, so it makes you an employee with a lot of freedom to do whatever until you're ready to give some resources away for perks in return, and after landing on that planet, it's no longer a loss for the company as they simply hand you blueprints that still use your resources. What an interesting, profiting, and humorous company. I'm sure there's nothing sinister hiding behind the scattered Ada lines, objectives, and project requirements. There is little, but enough wording and everything to be suggestive. It's subtle and gives total control to the player in the game's scenario. The world you visit makes sense to you as a visitor, and your job makes sense to you because you have returns. You're progressing, which is rewarded with more progress. There are resource sinks in the game that take more than one literal form that have a reason to exist, and the reason behind just being a way to progress the player's capabilities to harvest more resources and construct more complex items, it has a suggestive, darker undertone. Something's out there that makes your company send out engineers and return resources towards something beyond your scope and your vision. You're cheered on, interacted with in a somewhat concrete but cheesy manner as you contribute to something larger than yourself. But this game is just a fun ride into construction management and expansion. The way that the game doesn't explain itself but explains enough behind the reasons for you to be there and do your own thing is a satisfactory amount contributed to the reasoning behind gameplay. It leaves the player to the fun stuff and those with a slightly larger curiosity to wonder what goes on out there, and if you're really supposed to be ever asking. It's just ambiguous and vague, so some lore junkie like me gets to just go wild in my own head about what goes on beyond. This game's got a solid frame for this management and optimization heaven, with some pockets having this cult-like obsession over spaghetti. The core element of factory building in this game is expectedly thought through by introducing this small gameplay loop at first for resource gathering, processing, crafting, and building for gathering. The gathering of resources by hand introduces the interactivity part. The first requirements are very small, which makes for a small tutorial line that sets you up for understanding the rest of the upcoming core elements. Because that same loop expands eventually. It even branches out for things like personal upgrades that push you into exploration and purchase of decor developments that allow for more creative expression and functionality as well. The player will be taught the basics of gathering, organizing, and optimizing well enough to have a better grasp of the upgrades that come next, and when those upgrades do come next, firstly comes another bite-sized explanation, but then the complexity ever so slightly increases, which won't deter the player from going the extra inch because the upgrades introduce automation/comfort. That's the snare right there. Every time you're just given a bit more to work with and figure out as you've already grasped the levels that you've unlocked so far, and everything you know now works for what comes next. Now, if the factory management loop gets tiring, this is where the branched out progression comes swooping in and either nudging you to explore, discover and research, or earn, purchase and build. The MAM research table introduces the extra mile instead of the inch for progression that's separate from Fixit's tiers. There's these whole research trees that require you to explore, gather and research to help with new things like more complex factory items, tools, or gear for the player, or even some required items for the basic gameplay loop that make it slightly difficult to ignore the whole MAM branch in the first place. Then there's the whole resource sink branch that introduces a lot of items for more creative construction and even introduces purchasing of resources you might be short of and too lazy to find. But that was never an issue for me, at least. Anyway, the whole ticket kiosk is once again another separate branch that can net you more gameplay hours just for building something more defined, elevated, or interesting. There isn't much to it, as it's just a lot of building blocks for convenience and decoration, and somewhat function as well. Factory building, personal growth, and upgrades don't interest you right now? Okay, fine. Have a bunch of beautiful biomes to visit with adventurous tones of danger, discovery, and a bit of puzzling. Exploration's got you covered for discovering resources to exploit, enemies to fight, and build spots to discover, as well as a bunch of parkour bits that you can just, Then again, some areas separate themselves from the usual exploration paths, being harder to spot or harder to reach, introducing some complications that require you to evolve your arsenal. Whether it's the long distance that could use a better method of transportation, the need for air filters to visit toxic spots, or defeat increasingly more difficult enemies and be prepared to meet the things, each of these separate branches just introduce something completely different and interesting to do for hours. Later, after you've done it all, you can alternate between the different things to do and increasingly more effectively abuse the riches of the land with your pollution and waste. Without meeting the consequences, of course. There's just a whole lot to do right now, and a whole lot more to see from the developers. Movement's solid, animations are full of emotion, and even the mute character has, well, character. I really do respect the devs being able to say the fuck word on YouTube and not come across as stiff through some blog update or whatever. I'm actually excited to see what the developers come up with next and what else they're up to. Right now, I see them as honest and open, which I can put my trust in and, consume more product. It exists, it's fun, I'm just usually a solo. So, listen, the game warns you very well, it's an early access title, but you could give it a try if it lands in your category, since it's fairly solid and actually really fun. There's just way less jank than you would usually expect of an early access title, and I mean, CDPR released Cyberpunk as a finished game, so, it ain't so bad. And finally, time to address the you in the room. Gotta thank you for watching and all that, so thanks. But could you also take a moment to get out of your YouTube brain mode and check if you were entertained by the video? If you were, then consider liking it, and if you feel like you could do with some more entertainment like this, consider subscribing for more. I'll upload again, eventually. They give you the option to waste your resources on a skate park for small carts.